Let's see. I'm making this video because of the last subject we talked about. However, let's examine specific aspects of Japanese culture that have been romanticized. For me, it's too much and they're pretty normalized. Let's see. Let's start with the smallest thing, the least relevant, the least important. Zen culture and Japanese minimalism highlight the serenity of the Japanese people. Well, the reality is that there are very few minimalists in Japan. Zen culture is no longer a part of the daily life of Japanese people. In fact, Japan is a country with a lot of hoarders, people who accumulate things. Just imagine one of the most capitalist countries in the world, full of stores selling anime, music, and movies. This country lets you practice any hobby from around the world. If everyone were a minimalist, it wouldn't work. Capitalism. Precisely. The Japanese are, for the most part, very much hoarders. And on top of that, they are sometimes hoarders in very small spaces. That's why there are those who, well, they're there for a reason. There are also the gomi askia, which I already mentioned before. They are the garbage hoarders. And there are regular hoarders. And there are the regular hoarders who are hoarders of junk like a hobby.
The Japanese tend to hoard.
Despite all the talk about Zen culture and minimalism, that's not the reality. It's not like that. The Japanese aren't necessarily Zen, and they aren't typically minimalists. That's something I want you to keep in mind. Next, well, this is something insignificant. Let's talk about what they say about the Japanese in honor, right? Whenever people talk about social problems or news about things like that regarding the Japanese, they always mention honor, because honor is broken, because someone is taking away honor, and all those things. They mention that a lot about the Japanese. But the reality is that it's not so much about the word honor. It's more like a kind of assimilation. Since it's a country rooted in samurai culture, where honor was highly valued, it's not about honor, but rather about simpler things, like dignity, or even something a bit less exaggerated than dignity. It's reputation. Japanese people care a lot about reputation, not honor. Honor is already a word that makes everything seem bigger, right? Just by using the word honor, by saying honorable, it's like everything becomes much heavier, more intense, stronger, more samurai. Everything turns into that, right? And that's exactly another part. Example about the romanticization of Japanese culture. Another topic is food. People claim Japanese eat only healthy food, but that's not entirely true. Is it among the countries with the highest life expectancy? Yes. Does diet matter? Yes. However, it is also worth noting that people over 80 years old today don't eat in the same way as those of today. 30. Because nowadays there's a lot more processed food, a lot of instant food, and people eat out a lot because you can eat tasty and cheap food outside. For example, among the things you can get to eat out, you'll find dishes like curry, rice with curry, and a breaded cutlet on top, all clearly delicious. But it is something we should think twice about eating when we're on a diet. Obviously not. Therefore, Japan is a country with very good nutrition. Yes, but for example, when it comes to school menus, there, people eat balanced and healthy meals, and older people cook healthy food. But, you see, we also have to keep in mind that what you eat at home is not the same as what you eat outside. People say, most Japanese people are thin. Yes, because they avoid overindulging. Not overeat, but it's not true that everyone eats healthy. And there can be thin people who don't eat healthy. Portions in Japan aren't usually large, but there are still many places with big servings. But you have to keep in mind that the foundation of nutrition during children's development, that's when the body is getting strong, because it's being nourished in a balanced way. Once they're adults, maybe, if they don't eat enough, Perhaps they don't eat as well as an American person, but they may eat the same foods. However, their bodies might react differently because Japanese people may have slightly better organs. I can't explain that. Ask a doctor. But basically, Japanese people grow up with a good diet. But later on, what they eat can be pure junk. A lot of instant food. Especially single people, those who live alone eat anything, not necessarily healthy. The ones who are luckiest to eat well are those who have a housewife. At home, someone who prepares food and maybe thinks a little more about a balanced diet that also fits the household budget, and more. I discuss this with many people. In 50 years, average life expectancy, it's not going to be that high, because nowadays people here eat a lot of junk. Now, the more essential topics, we've just discussed the insignificant topics. There are two left which I want to explain a bit more. One is the topic of Ikigai, which is very romanticized in Japanese culture. The topic of the meaning of the word Ikigai. Now, what is Ikigai? Ikigai. Basically, it's the reason for living, which is the simplest way to explain it. That would be the most literal translation of the word, the reason for living. The fact is that there was a book that talked about the word Ikigai, and it's one of the books that has been translated into the most languages around the world. A huge bestseller, a big success because it's one of those self-help style books, like positive books. It's just like reading a book about Zen culture. The fact is that, according to the book, well, I haven't read the book. I'm not saying the book is bad, but basically in the book, the topic of that Ikigai is a word that sums up certain things. What you love to do, combined with your passion, joined with your talent, and what the world needs. It would be like a mission. And something you can get paid for. A profession is something you can get paid for, not that it necessarily has to be paid, but essentially it involves combining passion, talent, purpose, and profession. The fact is that the word Ikigai is a very common ordinary word that's not even used that much. But it's not a word that people typically analyze in depth. Let's see, just as there's Ikigai, there's also Yarigai. For example, Yarigai, my wife, like in recent years, changed jobs a lot. Like she would leave some jobs because she didn't have Yarigai. I mean, she didn't see any incentive or didn't feel passionate about doing the job. I mean, basically, she wasn't motivated. Or, for example, my in-laws who had a little dog and the dog passed away. My wife said that, for example, having a pet gave her an Ikigai. Because Ikigai essentially sums up a reason to live, something to keep us moving forward. For example, for many people, an Ikigai could be, for many elderly Japanese, an Ikigai is a harvest. But let's see. Ikigai is much more commonly used for older people because a younger person might have small children and that becomes their Ikigai. Something already quite normalized, natural, which is a reason to live. It's the children or the partner, or simply being useful in society through work, let's say. A reason to live. It is simply that. And the fact is that it goes much deeper. And the thing is that if you talk to a Japanese person, no one is going to talk deeply about what Ikigai is, right? But well, for an elderly person, a harvest is an Ikigai. Because they actually not necessarily need, but actually, it's not that you have to necessarily combine talent with this, with that, with the other, but rather, it's an Ikigai. Simply, having a reason to wake up every morning. It's like a job. Whether it pays a lot or a little, that's not what's important, but rather that it keeps them busy, right? Exactly. A pet is also an Ikigai because it gives you a bit of responsibility. Taking care of the pet. You have to feed it. You have to take care of its needs and all those kinds of things. Therefore, Ikigai is a word that refers to an everyday activity. and it's not something to delve too deeply into. As I said, I haven't read the book, I'm not saying it's bad, but it was very successful, and there are a lot of people who think of the word Ikigai as something like, oh no, because the Ikigai of the Japanese. And no. It's like, I don't know, thinking about the crowd, right? Of the samurai, which are the rules of the samurai, not all samurai. Strictly followed all the samurai honor codes, right? And that's much more traditionalist, but, well, more than anything, still, it's not like that. Now, the last thing I want to discuss in this video is the real reason I made the video. The rest of the content was just an excuse. The use of the word umami. Yes, sir, the word umami is one of the most misused words. It's one of the most poorly used words from the Japanese language that is given more relevance than it deserves, or than it should be. For those who don't know, umami is considered one of the 5 tastes, right? Like there's sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, something like that. And sometimes you find diagrams that show the tongue, indicating that this part tastes sweet, this part tastes salty, and this part contains umami. It is impossible to detect this for the average person. Now, why did this word start to annoy me? Because many people discuss the umami flavor. The last time I went to Argentina, I dined at a very fancy, high-end restaurant. I mean, it was high-end, let's say. Everything was really good, really well done, until at one point the chef says to me, "Can you feel the umami?" And that's where I froze. He ruined my meal and everything for me. Everything was fine until he used that damn word that exaggerates everything. Do you know what's wrong with the word umami? 1. It gives a certain level to a gastronomic conversation. Look, it's like saying, because this wine has body, and the person who doesn't know about wine is like, what does it mean that it has body? And of course, when you eat something, you say, Taihe umam tastes really good. Umami, of course, and you can't say, what is umami? Because of course you look like an idiot at a fancy dinner. You have to know. How can you not feel umami? What an ignorant guy. This kid has no palate, like a 10-year-old. That's one. The other one is that, let's see, umami basically comes down to, let me read it word for word because that'll be better. But it says, umami is a deep, rounded, and lingering flavor that enhances other flavors. We perceive it when we eat foods rich in glutamate, inosinate, or guanylate. Found naturally in many foods, like tomato, aged cheese, soy sauce, miso, dashi broth, mushrooms, shiitake, cured meat, seafood, and seaweed. But let's see. First, when was the term umami invented? And it was, let's say 1901, right? Okay. And when was Hajinomoto born? 1902, 1 year later. So, what is Hajinomoto? Basically, I once told my wife in a conversation. I asked her, what is umami? And she answered me, umami is Ajinomoto. No, that's a product that has umami. That's supposed to be umami. Something with a lot of flavor. Okay, I said, that's fine, we agree. Now, Ajinomoto is a product that was discovered, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is a derivative of glutamate. It's written on the screen. A gastronomic scientist discovered that kombu seaweed could provide something that enhances the flavor of other things. That's supposedly a chemical compound that makes the flavors of other things stand out. And that's kind of how the word umami was born. And the following year, they launched the Ajinomoto brand, which is a product that looks like salt, but it's not. When you see it, it looks like salt or sugar. And it's a product that you add to food. And what it does is enhance the flavor of the food. But if you taste the product, put it on your tongue, you don't feel anything. It's a strange taste, okay? It's not like salt, like sugar, like something acidic that you can feel, right? It gives you a sour sensation. But umami isn't something you easily recognize or say, wow, check out this umami. Basically, what is umami? And this is something that I ended up figuring out. My conclusion is that umami is basically the identity of the taste of food. It's the identity. I asked ChatGPT which products are rich in umami and which lack it. It said that the foods that lacks umami are white rice, unsalted bread, noodles served plain. And of course, those three things, bread, rice, and noodles, are always accompanied by something else. Noodles need sauce, otherwise they lack flavor. Bread, if it doesn't have salt and we don't fill it with something, also lacks flavor. And it's the same with rice, it doesn't have much flavor. It's just that you really have to know how to appreciate good rice, good plain pasta, good bread, right? Because they're not things that have a lot of flavor, they're meant to go with something else. On the other hand, products that have a lot of umami are things like fish dashi, because fish has a strong flavor. Or tomato, since it has a unique flavor. That's why it's used in sauces so often, right? Essentially, a product with a high umami content is one that has a rich flavor. For example, I visited Italy. I tried meat over there and I felt that the meat had no flavor. I mean, it lacked umami. Because no matter how much salt you put on that meat, all you're going to do is make it saltier. Now, good meat is when it tastes like meat. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. Do you understand, Jordy?
More or less.
What don't you understand?
For me, it's like salt 2.0 without flavor actually enhances flavors.
That's a good one. Salt 2.0, because salt enhances flavor, right? But if you overdo it, it tastes salty. It gets too salty. On the other hand, umami isn't. Let's see, there's this thing called Ajinomoto, and products that make the flavor stand out a bit more, right? But I don't know what a product would taste like with an excess of Ajinomoto. No, because the flavor of something has to have a limit, otherwise it's endless. Infinite flavor. If I take a fruit that doesn't have much flavor, and I add Ajinomoto, then the fruit will have flavor. No, that's not how it works either. Look, for example, we have orange, kiwi, and lemon. Sorry I don't have the natural fruits, but it doesn't matter. All three can be sweet and sour. But how do we know, or how can we tell which is which? Which one is orange? Which one is kiwi? Which one is lemon? Precisely, the identity of flavor, umami, is that the identity of flavor. This orange might have little flavor and be very acidic, or it might have more umami, meaning the orange flavor is very pronounced. And not just pure acid. It's the same with any other fruit, with any other food, with any product. Umami is that, the identity of flavor. Now, the Japanese use the word umami, similar to ikigai. Let's say yes, the word umami is used, but essentially the Japanese say, one feels the umami of now, because umami is exactly saying that really. Tastes like a specific product, right? Now, when a foreign chef asks you, can you feel the umami? What is the taste of umami, my friend? I mean, for something to be umami, it means the flavor really stands out. Exactly. Let's see. For example, you can really taste the umami in a Roquefort cheese because it has a strong cheese flavor. Now, a diet cheese lacks umami, not because it has less salt, but because it has less cheese flavor. Basically, that's the comparison between something with umami and something without umami. Let's see. Scientists will know if it makes sense that it's another taste the tongue perceives, besides sour, sweet, bitter, salty, right? But in general, for me, it was simply a big romanticization. A very romanticized term of Japanese gastronomy. Look, I'm not saying it doesn't deserve it. In fact, quite the opposite. Japanese gastronomy deserves the fame it has, because it's very rich in everything. I mean, Japanese gastronomy has it all. But that thing about giving even I asked ChatGPT. I even asked, is the word umami often used to give a conversation about gastronomy a higher level? And the answer was yes. The answer was yes, basically. Similarly, Ikigai is often overly romanticizes the meaning of living, and yes, it said yes. It romanticizes it. Those who know about gastronomy will obviously say, oh, but this guy doesn't know anything. He just says whatever he wants. Just because he had a conversation with ChatGPT. That's fine. I don't want to ruin anyone's culinary career either. However, please don't use the word umami randomly. To the chefs, please. Umami means something with enhanced flavors. Just like there will be people who say an entire video just to explain that nonsense. You know what? The thing is, I had this conversation with friends. And honestly, the whole time we were saying, what the heck is umami? The whole time with another friend who knows about Japan and all that. We talked about umami, and in the end, we didn't come to any conclusion at all. Because it's an enhanced flavor, and we knew it comes from Ajinomoto. I've known Ajinomoto since I was a kid, because my mom had it at home. And she told me that it made the flavor stand out. That it made the flavor stand out, period. Now I should try at home using a product by adding a lot of Ajinomoto, an excess of Ajinomoto, and the same product without Ajinomoto, and see what the difference is. Even so, I don't see the logic of it. Being another taste, that the palate, that the tongue perceives, one more flavor. It's like the sixth sense, or even the seventh sense of the zodiac night skies. Who can't feel the cosmos? What do you mean they can't? Greetings to you, your family, pet, and annoying neighbor.